Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
And welcome back to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. This is Chris Parker, and today I'm going to be discussing the power of purpose with Steve Fuller from The House. And The House did some, I think, really good and meaningful support and advisory for us back when we were doing some things in the energy sector. We might talk about that a bit. But I'm delighted to have Steve here to share his vision on the power of purpose for organizations and maybe what the house, can do for organizations like yours. So Steve, welcome to the conversation. And can you please share with us, Steve, what is it that you do and why do you do what you do?
Starting with the why, I love that, Chris. That's exactly what we do as a business is, what we do is we help organizations work out why they do what they do rather than describe what they do. Why is that a powerful question? Well, maybe if you phrase it differently, rather than you say, why do you do? What if you were to say, what's important? What's important about the work that you do? Because I think that really shifts you from our why is all about making money to really starting to question what's the impact that you want to have, what's the impact you want to have on the world, our world? What's the impact that you want to have on your customer and on society? What's the impact you might have if, for example, you made future generations your customer rather than your current customer? So really our work is to provoke, inspire and support businesses to be a force for good in the world.
And what is the impact that you want to achieve through that, to take your lead?
Yeah, I think so. Building on that point around future generations, we've made a commitment next year to make future generations our client. Mm-hmm. So whoever we work with, we will invite them in to share future generations as our client. So the impact we want to make is to probably do two things. One, fundamentally, have a legacy. Have a legacy that says the house and the house's clients clearly set out to improve conditions, improve the environment, reduce carbon, to increase access to education, a whole host. If you take the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, if at the very least, I can slip this mortal coil thinking that I, and through my clients, have made a little dent in any of those, then I believe I'll have done something important over and above being a great dad to my boys and a good husband. And we're talking about impact, Chris, and that there's a direct impact around working with my clients to really work out how we can improve the world that we live in today, but also improve the world for generations to come, for a better life tomorrow. So that means going after healthcare for all, improving education where possible, supporting diversity around gender, around neurodiversity, around race. For me, it's about celebrating diversity of thinking. So if you think about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, I really would love to think that by working with my clients, we can at least put a dent in some of those. And then the second point, I think the greatest impact we can make is through our role as a B Corporation, to celebrate the work of B corporations, of which there are now, I think we're 3,700 B corporations around the world, which includes Ben & Jerry's, which includes Danone, Allbirds, the footwear brand. To really shift this idea and shift the business paradigm from we're only here to serve shareholders, which is a hugely destructive mindset, that it's just about the pursuit of money, to the idea that we can clearly make a contribution. We can serve a wider group, which includes society and, of course, our planet. And you can do those things, and you can be a sustainable, profitable business. I think if we can build that narrative, Chris, and share the truth of that and demonstrate the efficacy of that idea, then we can encourage more businesses, especially startups, to go, I believe I can create something amazing that's going to really make an impact, and make me wealthy, but make me wealthy for all the right reasons.
Yeah, doing well while doing good is something I hear more and more. We were talking a bit before we pressed record about the impact of Corona and COVID, and you've been in the purpose theme, the purpose space for many years. My feeling is this global pandemic has really reset people's thinking about what's actually important, because financial growth simply for the sake of growth, when it's not possible because of a pandemic, well, then actually all these other things become possible. So what's your perspective on, I guess, how Corona has helped us refocus, and do you think we're going to be able to maintain that, or are we all going to go back to Gordon Gekko, greed is good?
Well, I think it has been a remarkable time of reflection and consideration around what all of us want to get from life and our working life. I don't really divide those two things. I think they're one and the same. And again, one of the weird paradigms that exist is that we tell ourselves that we live to work rather than work to live. I actually don't agree with either of those statements. I think we're here, we live with purpose, and our pursuit is, certainly in my case, is to leave this place a better place than when I came into the world. And I think I try to do that whether I'm at work or at home. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting idea, Chris, that COVID has been a bit of a forced pause. What's really weird is that my business partner, Graham, who I know you're going to be speaking to in another episode, actually said to us sort of January time, what would happen if we just took 3 months out of the business? What would happen if we could just stop and not necessarily need the income? Of course, in a way, we got that. And that has really forced a reset. So it's been really good for us as a business just to review what's worthwhile and where we apply ourselves. And I truly feel that's happened with a lot of organizations. They've really started to work out, what's the contribution I want to make? How do I want to be useful? Are there different forms of growth? Is it about the growth of the self? Or is it about a deeper relationship with customer? Is it about the idea of legacy and impact more than it is around bottom right-hand corner? We talk a lot, and it's a tool we use. We talk a lot about the top right-hand corner. Where's the vision? Where's the dream? And how does the world, and how do the people that live in the world live in that vision? What does the world really need from us as business leaders? Way above and beyond what shareholders want. And I hope your point. I hope more and more people are reflecting on that point. Certainly, my sense is, and again, you've got to be careful not in an echo chamber. I think the pursuit of meaning, whether you call that purpose or otherwise, I think the pursuit of meaning is really escalated. For those that are fortunate enough, and I think that's the other point, Chris, is, I think business has a job of work to do to support people who aren't as fortunate as entrepreneurs, to be able to design their own destiny.
I think the pursuit of meaning, and then which is triggering me on another thing that we've spoken about is putting purpose to practice, because what I'm seeing a lot is maybe say marketing statements around purpose, but if an organization's purpose includes providing those possibilities for those people who for whatever reason are maybe less fortunate. So if you had to give one or a couple pieces of advice on how an organization could put their purpose to practice, or even discover their purpose in relation to their customers, how would you trigger that with them?
Yeah, so I think there's some really straightforward pieces. So if you're a pre-existing business and you've got some history, maybe go back to founding principles. Really work out why your organization existed in the first place. That's certainly what Unilever did. They went all the way back to Port Sunlight, and this idea that Lord Leverhulme created a whole village. Actually, he built the village before he built the factory that created Sunlight Soap. Sunlight Soap was there to meet a need. The need was to tackle the issues around hygiene. Young children in London were dying due to poor hygiene. That was the observation. Now, it was happening all over the country, but that was the insight. And of course, we come back to where we are today, and hand hygiene has never been more important in the world. And it may not be with Sunlight Soap anymore. It's definitely with Lifebuoy. So Lifebuoy has been working in India for years now around improving hand hygiene. Because if you don't wash your hands, you get diarrhea. If you get diarrhea, you get dehydrated. If you're dehydrated, sadly, you die. And every year 2 million children die before the age of 5 because of poor hand hygiene. It's just frightening. It's really, really frightening that something we take as a norm is killing children. So I think that there's principle number one, is you potentially go back into your DNA, work out why you started. So many organizations were created to serve. So if you come back to farm equipment, that farm equipment, you have one client who's an agricultural engineer, and they started as an ironmonger. Ironmongers started by helping farmers, tend their crops, so farmers could then feed the people in their area. So there's a lot of truth in your history that may still be relevant today. You may play it out differently because we've got technology, but that's one area I would look at. If you're a startup, my first question will be, have you looked at the basics around what you're good at, what you really care about, what does the world need, and how will you be rewarded? Those are the 4 beautifully simple but hard to answer questions of Ikigai, the Japanese 4-part Venn diagram. If you can answer those 4 questions, you're in with a good shot of defining what your purpose is. But importantly, you're working out how you'll be rewarded as well. So you're starting to look at some of the strategic opportunities of your purpose, rather than potentially, and this isn't happening everywhere, but it's happening, and it annoys me greatly, where purpose is used as a veneer. It's used as you say, potentially spin or a promotional message that has no substance. And it annoys me because it makes it harder for organizations that are working strategically to get the recognition that they deserve. We potentially, you've been there, I've been there, Chris, around greenwashing. You and I talk about really green rather than nearly green. We know those organizations who are trading off, maybe they're trading off certification rather than genuine generation of green or sustainable energy.
I have to believe purpose for marketing is sort of a, it has a shelf life, because if they're attracting people who are, sympathetic to that purpose or it resonates with them, they will quickly see that it's inauthentic, and I think it'll actually backfire. So it's proceed with caution with that. So
yeah, I think I've got a couple of points, Chris. One would be, what's the true definition of marketing? True definition of marketing is identify a need and meet it profitably. So if that need's a genuine need in the world, then the maths is there. I heard that if you went after the Sustainable Development Goals, it's a $17 trillion $17 trillion opportunity. So there's a lot of cake to go around if we shift our perspective on what we believe business is here to do.
What if that original spark of inspiration and purpose is not the reason the management team's there? That the management team there has fundamentally different values or split values, because that's something I'm sometimes torn. Looking at an organization that's established, that's running, that's trying to go back to basics, but they've attracted people because of their lack of focus or lack of self-awareness over time. They've attracted some really different personalities, and diversity of thinking is always good. But if you have fundamentally different values, that can be a major obstacle, and that will come through to, the experience you're creating with your customers. So what's your perspective on getting people on the same page, or maybe making hard decisions on changing the purpose to meet the humans that are there currently, or changing the humans?
Yeah, I'm going to say purpose trumps humans, because ultimately purpose is there to serve many humans rather than the few humans that are inside the organization. That's easy for me to say because I'm not the people who don't fit. But I would say, this is ultimately about authenticity and integrity. And a lot of our work actually, Chris, starts with personal purpose. And you've seen me in action, sitting in a room with the co-founders of PowerPeers and asking them why this stuff's so important. And until we get to the truth of why it's important, then I'm not sure we do share values. And if we don't share values, we don't necessarily share the energy that's needed. I think businesses run on energy. And I think the excitement of being in pursuit of something meaningful allows us to go above and beyond, both with our imagination, but also with our commitment. And I would argue that there's a lot of value in dealing with those people issues now, because they'll come back and bite you in the future. They'll come back. And I think what's really interesting is if you get it right early enough, then you can recruit against your purpose. And what I mean by that is you're recruiting people who share your values, who will build on your culture. They still have to be really capable. Yeah. So it's not good enough just to have people with, because I think that's just as dangerous. If you get people to share your values, but they're not good at their job, that's just as dangerous as having people who are highly capable who don't share your values.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's one or the other. I think the real power is in getting people who clearly see what you can go and do in the world and have the capability to help you make it happen.
Yeah, I love that. To the point that with the little artifact that I've been developing over the years, the simplicity scan, top left is purpose, and top right is people. And oftentimes people do the scan in columns. And a nice check is if you also look across, the rows, if you will, because across that top row is the purpose, the milestones, and the people. And what I simply say is, well, the milestones are the main things you need to achieve as a business to get where you want to go. And again, it depends on where you want to go. And then the people will be who actually achieves that for you. And they should, in principle, be driven by that purpose. And so if you can get it, simplified, and you can start connecting some of those dots. Another thing I always look out for when people are filling out that scan or any sort of document that's a self-reflective sort of questioning document is, how do you measure your impact? Because that's something that I would say, 9+ times out of 10 on the same scan, they have some, ambitious, impact in the world type statement. But then when you say, well, what do you measure? What are your KPIs? It's pretty much financial. And you're like, well, wait a second. So what is the best example, or do you have advice on how to measure if it, or should it be measured, question mark, the actual impact or the actual realization of the purpose now and over time?
Yeah. So I think it's really important to put measures in, Chris, because I think whilst, and maybe this is the challenge, most purpose stories are full of inspiration. They're not necessarily full of data. So I think great stories are the stories that marry magic and logic, because that's who we are as people. We have to win hearts and minds in this tale if we're really to transform business. So I think a lot of people have their heart in what purpose could be, but we have to work just as hard with the logic stuff and the data. Actually, for this session alone, I've just started to pick out loads and loads of data. So Unilever, here's a great one. So Unilever, their sustainable living brands are growing 69% faster than the rest of the business, and they're delivering 75% of the company's growth. So if I want to grab an investor's attention around something we're measuring, then I can use that story. But there are some really, really provocative and powerful numbers behind that growth. So here's some numbers. So Dove has helped 35 million young people around the world with self-esteem education since 2005. So if you want to talk about impact, it's remarkable. Lifebuoy, which I mentioned earlier, has reached 1 billion people with its hand washing campaign. So that really correlates around, saving lives. Vaseline has reached 3 million people living on the front line of poverty and disaster with their skin healing programs. Ben & Jerry's go after social justice and climate change. Those things can be measured. It might be the number of court wins. If you're Patagonia, it will be the number of activists that you supported through your toolkit, or the number of new business startups that are about regeneration and re-energizing our soil, or finding more efficient ways to grow cotton. It's all measurable, Chris. And I think the other thing I would do is say to the magic people, get some more logic in there, get some more data in there, because people will want to know that it is transformative, and we need data. We're as logical as we are magical as human beings. And we live in a world, sadly, that's hugely cynical, and therefore you're going to have data. However, on a more positive note, we want to report progress. B Corp invite every B Corporation to write an impact report every year. That's so much more interesting than writing a financial end of year statement. What's the impact you've made this year? So if I was thinking about the house, I'd be thinking about, well, through our clients, have we improved the health and well-being of people through our health technology client? Have we helped more people find a home that makes them safe and happy with our social housing clients? Have we improved the quality of thinking and education with the universities we work with? That, for me, they're far more interesting questions than have we improved our EBITDA? I'm really interested in, has our EBITDA improved because of the impact we're making in the world? Seeing it as an outcome rather than as the driver.
But what you're saying is actually triggering some fear in me and uncertainty, because if you have, that makes it also real. I mean, if you have a magical and logical statement and you're measuring it, then I have to make hard decisions about maybe who I don't want to have as a customer. And that maybe isn't what everyone wants to talk about.
Well, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's about having some degree of discipline and some forced focus. And that probably comes back to your tool around simplicity. Your tool forces some clarity, some decision making, removing some of those vagaries that we can use as excuses if we don't succeed. So I think purpose is a strategic tool, Chris. I've said that to you before. I don't think it's a nice to do at all. I think it really does drive that degree of focus around how do we know that we're successful. Have we truly reduced our carbon emissions? Have we truly found new materials to replace polyesters? Have we really gone after this? Are we genuine in our purpose? And I can say that because, to my clients, because I ask myself that every day of the week, and that's around personal integrity. And of course, that's driven by meaning, and meaning is driven by the fact that we get one shot at this thing called life.
It's really triggering a experience I had, and this goes back 10 years ago when I was a CIO for a large financial services organization, and there's an account exec from Cisco who showed up. And Cisco's a great company, it's had its heyday and its ups and downs and its pivots, and even back then I would start these conversations with, well, why does Cisco exist? What do you mean?
Yeah.
And they never had an answer. And one of the guys was, younger, hungry. He says, well, we exist to be the best company that ever existed. I said, well, you never will be. Because how do you measure that? And, quite frankly, that, time has moved on. You're doing, basically, large switches for large companies. So, what? And I saw him at the airport in Lisbon, like 2 or 3 years later, and he ran up to me and he remembered me, and he says, like, you know what? And we sat and had a chat. He's like, that was one of the most thought-provoking questions he's ever received from a customer, because no one had ever asked him that before. And actually that sparked a whole, process of debate and discussion, at least with him. And I think he was still with Cisco. So somehow he reconciled it. But those are beautiful conversations to have, and just say, like, okay, hey, you want to work, you want to partner. Okay. Why do you exist? And let me share with, why we exist. And I guess that's also where the human comes into this whole thing as well. So I think there's
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that sense of fear, Chris, because purpose does, force those questions, the really big questions. And it does ask us to challenge ourselves around our integrity. Are we only here to work hard and earn money? Is that what we exist for as human beings? Are we using the veneer of, a good house, a good car, kids going to a good school? Are we using that veneer as an excuse to hide behind what it is that we really want to go and do? I've seen it. It's a really powerful tool, purpose, and you need to use it carefully. And I would always say to every client, before you start this stuff, are you ready for what it might unlock in you as well as in your team? Mm-hmm. Because you'll get a whole host of responses. You'll get those who are in now forever. They're locked in. They're right beside you. You'll get those who will check out. And you've got those who can ask you loads of really difficult questions about what that means to you as a leader.
And for me, it's in my experience, this type of work is, and maybe it's a bit, overdone, but literally the journey for me is more important than the outcome, because the words on a purpose statement might be considered by other people as just generic, corporate candy terms. But but I've been in some initiatives where, as a management team, we were never able to finish that conversation. We were never able to get to the same page, and then it actually fizzled. We lost our funding, etc. In the case of Power Peers, where I think there was a pretty tight coherence of purpose amongst the team, but the timing and maybe the sponsor was wrong because it was out of alignment, and it was just things like that. So,
I think that's an interesting one. Around timing. When is a good time to do this? I would always encourage, and this is what's interesting for me. I'm working and mentoring a number of startups right now, and the obsession around securing funding before getting the story straight. The obsession with the technology rather than the value of the technology to the world. It stupefies me. I sit there, mouth to God, going, And they're like, yeah, we'll deal with the culture stuff and the story stuff, when we come to phase 2 or 3. And it's like the opportunity to get it right from day one, and you recruit against your purpose and the impact you want to make because your technology is so wonderful. It's a market that we really now choose to avoid, because you can only bang your head against a brick wall for so long before you bleed to death.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, and maybe I picked this up in one of our previous conversations long ago. But because my own ambition was like being fed up with corporates, I went into coaching in startups, but then I experienced the same thing. And actually now I'm looping back to the corporates and established businesses because they actually have the momentum and the humans in order to actually make the impact. So it's I totally hear that. So, but in the sadly, in the spirit of time, I'm curious, what types of organizations can you support? So like, what is your perfect customer, human and organization, and what might you do for them?
So that's a great question. So we're pretty agnostic around sector. We're first and foremost, the CEO has to be up for it. So our starting point would be a conversation with the CEO that says, do you really want to do this? And are you prepared for what this transformation might require of you and your leadership team? So that's first. And we've always said probably that there are 3 areas that we're interested in. So without getting too Star Wars about it, there are those on the dark side that are looking for light. So we have in our history worked with alcohol brands who are reimagining what they might be in the future.
Oh, wow.
We've worked with food ingredient brands that are around, sweetening rather than fortifying. But I believe in both cases, there were senior members of that team that really felt that they could make those changes. In one case, the senior leader is no longer there because the changes weren't made. That's interesting. So yeah, I don't think we should be beating up organisations that find themselves on the wrong side of, the good and bad debate. I think that's far too binary and it's far too short-sighted. And as you say, if we can get an organisation like BP or Shell to transform energy at scale, because they've got the money, because they've got the people, because they've got the network, wouldn't that be amazing? So I think it's very easy to land in judgment because of the history of some businesses. The second space is probably those businesses who've got a sense of their purpose, but they don't know what to do with it. So so we're doing an increasing amount of the how of the why. How do you make the most of your purpose? And then the third one would be those that have got a plan but don't know how to deliver the plan. So the cultural transformation that's required, the innovation thinking that's required. So that they've got all of the pieces in the box, but they don't have the lid. Yeah, which I think again coming back to your tool, how do you paint the picture of what might be, and help them coordinate that in a way that they make the most of what they see for their role in the world. So yeah, we're really agnostic, providing people really worked out that they could do something amazing based on what the world needs. And there are 17 things that the world needs because we know what they are. They're in the Sustainable Development Goals. So any client that wants to answer any of those challenges, we're up for it.
Well, my experience with working with the house was great because it was a sustainable green energy startup, which at the time was the world's largest peer-to-peer energy sharing marketplace. I think it still is, but it's not scaling as maybe we had hoped it would be because of different Corona and funding, etc. But definitely triggering, confronting, bringing us together. I think the binding of the management team was one thing, but then also crafting that story, and then making decisions based on the story and roadmap and investment. I think it was all brilliant. So if people want to get a hold of you, I think it's thehouse.co.uk is where the agency is. I will also put a link to your LinkedIn on the show notes. Steve Fuller again with the house. And I would like to highlight with people, and I'll put it in the tips, that you've published a number of editions of the Purpose, or just not the Purpose, but Purpose magazine, that has just packed with stories and anecdotes, and it's also published on Medium. So I'll put the medium.com/Purpose magazine right there in the show notes, so people can go there for inspiration and also get a taste of your style and your insights and what value you can bring. So, Steve, this has been brilliant. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your vision and also how you can help us all,
Thank you, Chris.
be better off tomorrow.
Yeah, delighted. And the one final thing I would say is we're really open to collaboration too. So if people have got an idea, got a thought, got something in a country that they want to animate, then we're up for that as well.
Lovely. Thanks a lot, Steve.
Take care.
Learn more at ebullient.com/podcast.